Hello, this is Richard Carafel from Agility PR Solutions, and welcome to PR Profiles. It's a video series and podcast where we chat with experts in the PR and communications industry because we think PR is the most formidable, dynamic, and rewarding field there is. And we wanted to introduce you to some of our favorite powerhouses in the industry. Today, we're speaking with Justin Goldstein, founder of Press Record Communications and one of the winners of PRSA-New York's 2019 Exceptionals Under 35 Awards. Hi, Justin.
Hey there. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at your agency.
Sure. So I've been in PR for about actually a little over a decade now. Started off in the broadcast media relations space, working for an organization that focused a good amount on satellite and radio media tours and audio news releases and whatnot. And then I moved my way over to a more traditional firm, Fin Partners, where I worked in the B2B tech practice for about 3.5 years and launched Press Record about 3 years ago. And I'm the president and founder of the company.
Nice. Very good. That's a nice trajectory you're on. Awesome. Okay, so this is kind of a rapid fire interview, so we're just going to jump right in here with the first question. Now, one thing our listeners are interested in is setting client expectations, especially when it comes to earned media. Now, what approach do you take with your clients? Is this a conversation you have during client onboarding, or is it a fresh conversation at the beginning of each new campaign?
So I typically have the conversation during the prospecting stage and onboarding stage because I want clients, before we actually decide to collaborate together, I want them to feel comfortable with my approach, which is from a metrics perspective, a bit more conservative. I like to try to keep the expectations a little bit lower, especially in the crazy news cycle that we're in, with Ukraine being the most recent example. I like to tell clients, it's not to say we're not going to get coverage, it's going to be valuable and impactful, but from a quantitative perspective, it may be, depending on the news cycle, a little bit less than you would like at the beginning. And then we gradually build from there. So I do like to set that expectation up front. And I think it's also important to understand exactly who they want to target so we can tell them whether realistically they have the assets to be able to do that.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. So what are some ways that communications professionals can be proactive with both client and media relationships? And what are some of the rewards you've seen being proactive results in?
So from a client perspective, I think it's always about thinking 2 steps ahead and understanding where their pain points are. From the media relations avenue more specifically, I think one example would be if you know that your client is strapped for time and can't necessarily review every aspect of what you're doing from a media relations perspective, you can sort of give them an end of week overview to just get an understanding of your progress to date and what you worked on. Also just trying to get at least the baseline talking points of what are going to be involved in a pitch for approvals. They don't have to review the whole thing. It's just they can improve the overall concept. And then from a media relations perspective, I think it's more about being persistent, especially in this day and age, where reporters are working remotely still. There's less of them at traditional, newsrooms. So, picking up the phone and being proactive and persistent about that, I think actually does pay off quite a bit. And the payoff that I've seen from a client perspective is they do, depending on who it is, because you don't want to be too persistent where it might annoy them a little bit if you're checking in every second of the day. But for the ones that appreciate it, I think, the feedback that I've gotten is it's saved them time, it's reduced their stress, it's helped them to communicate with their team better. And then from a media relations perspective, the reporters that really value it are the ones that will come back and say, I was really, hunting for a source and you came in at the right time. So thank you for doing that. So you have to kind of pick your spots a little bit and be strategic, but I think being proactive and persistent is the way to go, at least for most people.
Yeah, that sounds good. And that kind of dovetails with what you said about setting client expectations, which I think is a very reasonable and solid approach you talked about. So very good. All right. Thanks, Justin. Now, here's a fun question. You've identified 5 common mistakes that comms pros make and 5 easy solutions that could tighten up client-facing and outbound communications. Would you mind sharing those, talking about those for a minute?
So I think, as you mentioned, Richard, there are typically 5 mistakes that I see when it comes to client relations. So one of them being, as we touched upon already, the proactivity aspect. So, what I've seen some teams do in my experience working with them, being involved in agencies, is that, you kind of hit the ground running with a lot of momentum, you bring a lot of positivity to an account and a lot of value, but then it kind of peters off as you move along in time and you start to get a little complacent. So I think the best thing to do is to feel like you're on your toes in terms of always wanting to, like we already addressed, think 2 steps ahead of what the client is going to need and what's going to bring them value. And I think one good example is, you're not only communicating to your client, likely that's going to be, especially if you're working with an in-house team, it's going to be, a PR director or a marketing director. You're also communicating in a way to the people above them, whether that's their board of directors, their C-suite, or the person's direct manager. So it's always thinking about, as an example of this, which I think is critical, always thinking about what the value is going to be for that end person that your client is going to communicate to. So that's why I mentioned, even sharing the end of week reports that very nicely in a detailed way recaps the progress that you've had today and the work that you've done. Trying to also just get a further understanding of when your contact presents to these to their colleagues, what's going to be most valuable for those colleagues to see, so you can keep adding to that. And if there's any shift in terms of understanding what kind of media and opportunities are going to be valuable, you can address that right away and start to make some adjustments that are going to only provide value for you several months from now, a year from now, whatever it's going to be. I think also, going on to that point, understanding what the metrics are, what the real metrics are that you're going to be based on, your performance is going to be based on, is important. And that kind of goes back, I think, to setting expectations at the outset, meaning that if a client says, well, we want national TV, right? The question is, well, what exactly is it that you want for national TV? Is it more of a CNBC Squawk Box, or is it the Today Show? Understanding exactly what that is and what the metrics are, or failure to do so, is only going to hinder you in the long term, because you could be throwing 50 national, well, that's going to happen because it's hard to do, but you could be throwing multiple national TV hits your client's way. But if they keep saying it's not the right audience, it's not the right format, et cetera, it's only going to make things worse in the end. So drilling into that detail, I think, is really important. I think also client responsiveness is really important as well. You don't want to get into a habit with clients where they think that they can necessarily dial you at 10 o'clock at night for any odd reason, just to chat. But I think there's 2 extremes. There's that, and also just not being responsive at all. You want to try to be somewhere in the middle. So to me, trying to respond to clients within 24 to 48 hours usually works really well for me. And 48 hours to me is pushing it, in my opinion. I think 24 hours for a turnaround response to an email, voicemail, whatever it is, that's really important, because it shows you're prioritizing their communication. And of course, the sooner that you can respond, the better. And then I would say listening is another one that is that's important. So, what I found that I've had to even grow into is that you sometimes want to get your opinion out there a little much. And if you feel really strongly about a recommendation, you really want to push it because you think it's the right thing to do. But at the end of the day, listening and really hearing what the client's saying in terms of what they want and making the best adjustment that you can to that is ultimately what's going to provide a more fruitful relationship. Because, again, this goes back to expectation setting and trying to provide value. If you're still far away from what they want, at the end of the day, it's not going to matter. So the only thing you can really rely on is the fact that you provided sound counsel, and kind of go from there the best way that you can.
Those are a lot of great points you hit there. Let's see. You talked about seeing the big picture about all the stakeholders, I guess you could say, in the pitching game. So you know everyone's being represented. You talked about know who you're pitching, know the show, what the angles and the formats that they prefer. You talked about responding in a timely manner, and you talked about listening carefully to the clients. Those are all excellent points. Thanks, Justin. Okay, so what to you is the best thing about being in communications?
I think you get to use your personality a lot, which maybe is a little bit underrated in our industry. One of the reasons that I got into PR and I love media relations is because, yes, it can be stressful to pitch reporters, but at the end of the day, you're still having those conversations. And with the reporters that you have a really good relationship with, you can develop those sound relationships and feel more comfortable talking to them and just start to, have more real conversations. And that involves an art and being able to establish those kind of relationships and whatnot. But I think it's something that helps to keep the juices flowing and people excited about doing their job every day. It's just being able to show their true selves when the opportunity arises. I think that's a little undervalued in our industry, but important. So I think that also translates to the client side as well, is that, of course, you don't want to push it too far where you're getting a little too friendly, but at the same time, it allows you an opportunity to really show yourself to the client, build that relationship, have more inflection in your voice. You feel like you're a little bit more animated, and it just creates more of a fun atmosphere, I think, than some other professions maybe would allow you to do.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great way to look at the industry. It is a dynamic one. So wonderful. That's great. Thanks, Justin. Now, how do you stay up to date? What methods do you use to stay up to date on industry trends, new ideas, emerging tech, things like that?
I think newsletters are probably the best way. Google alerts are good. They work well, but I think the problem with Google alerts is, like anything else, they're faulty. So they're going to pick up, even with your keywords, message or articles necessarily that don't fit what you're looking for, and you just get frustrated and kind of click off of them sometimes. So I think subscribing to industry newsletters are a good idea, because it helps. It provides an avenue where a third party, that being the publication, is already vetting out what might be important to the audience that you're looking to reach, and you can read through it to better understand what the story is and why it's resonating.
Great answer. Thank you for that. Okay, now what advice would you give to students or people that are just starting out in communications?
Internships are incredibly important, not necessarily because of the work that you'll be doing, because as we all know, internships could go one of two ways. You could either be doing a good amount of work and being a resource, or you could just be, filing papers and getting to know the office and doing some of the basic stuff. What it's really great for, in my opinion, is networking and being able to also get into an office environment, well, virtually these days, potentially, but really understanding how PR works and the pace of PR. Because I think what some students maybe aren't aware of is that it truly is a fast-paced nature. It's not something you just see on a job description. It is really fast-paced. And so being in that environment, seeing what it's like, it really helps you to understand what kind of environment you're walking into and potentially will be walking into for the rest of your career, and whether your personality fits that. Because it is an exciting profession. It's a lot of fun when it can be, but it's very fast-paced and can be grueling.
That is terrific advice. Thank you, Justin. All right, and finally, how can people connect with you?
So you can visit Press Record's website at www.pressrecord.co, not .com. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I would say those are the two best ways.
Okay, terrific. That's a good amount of traffic, good avenues there. Okay, great. So thanks. That's all the time we have, everybody. Again, we've been chatting with Justin Goldstein, founder of Press Record Communications. Thanks for joining us today, Justin.
Thank you.
All right. We hope you enjoyed this episode of PR Profiles, brought to you by Agility PR Solutions. Before you go, we have a quick question. Is your media monitoring set up to include podcasts? Because whether they're part of your earned media strategy or you just want to know where your competitors are advertising, you can't afford to miss out on monitoring podcasts. So talk to your Agility account representative or contact us via our website, agilitypr.com, to learn how you could add podcasts to your media monitoring. So thanks again to Justin, and we hope to see you guys at the next episode.